Hello, everyone. Hi. My name's Heather Henry, nurse of the parish. I am a honorary senior lecturer at the University of Salford, a Queen's nurse, and I do social innovation and asset-based community development. And today, and also I do singing for lung health, poetry, photography, and very bad watercolours, if you're interested. And this session on health creation is all about creativity, art, and well-being. When we talk about health creation, we're talking about the things that make people well, rather than the things that make people sick. It's things like having a reason to get up in the morning, something purposeful to do, having a friend, having connections, having control over your life, those sorts of things. And not only when we say community, we don't just mean the people in your town. What we're talking about is any sort of community. And today I think we'll be touching on clinical communities, student nurses as a cohort, as a community as well. So, and the thing is that the evidence for how creative approaches like art and dance and drama and gardening and music improve well-being is getting ever stronger, but it still has to battle with this idea that it's about service delivery to meet needs, to make people better, to fix them. And what we're after in this academic network is a bit of a balancing up of those two approaches, the ones about what's the matter with people and how can we make them better, and also what's strong in communities, what the communities want to enable them to flourish. And how do we put that into an undergraduate curriculum, not just for health and care students, although we might talk about that a lot here, but also beyond, like social work, policing, housing, architecture, town planning, any of the humanities, all of the above. And today's guests, we have with us two organisations. They're both very different, so you may have come for one or the other. But the point of an academic network is that we go down the road less travelled and we meet different people who have different ideas. So I'm sure we'll have some of those today. So our first organisation is Creative Minds, and today we've got Phil Walters, who may have renamed himself, and Dave Watson. And it's a charity hosted by an NHS Foundation Trust. And I thought that was very important. It's South West Yorkshire Partnership Foundation NHS Trust. And it's there to help people achieve their potential. They use collective decision-making and an asset-based approach to integrate creativity and arts into mainstream health and wellbeing practice. And as well as Yorkshire, we've got with us Ulster and Health Action Training, and their role, their purpose is that Matt and Pat are here from there. I'll do their full bios later. Is to introduce techniques drawn from actor training and applied drama to improve person-centred communication for health professionals. And its mission is to help people to connect with themselves and each other as individuals and communities. And they do this by teaching skills of attention, collaboration and respect, building on the relationships, courage and compassion that make us human and help us to grow. So do sit back, introduce yourself to each other. There's a chat function, as you know. Please do chat. There'll be plenty of opportunity to talk to each other, ask questions after the two presentations. So do jot down some thoughts. Please stay away from jargon and abbreviations because we have people from all sectors and members of the public. So I will ask you to explain things if it's a bit jargony. And speakers, I hope you'll keep to time. We're doing about 20 minutes each. And the underlying thought for this event is, so what should we be teaching undergraduates about creative approaches to well-being, so that when they go out and work with different communities, they know how to create wellness as well as prevent and treat illnesses. The event recording will be on our Facebook, on our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel for Health Creation, and our website is hcan.uk. So I'm going to introduce our first guests, Phil Walters and Dave Watson. And Phil is the strategic lead for Creative Minds, and he started as head of equity and inclusion, which involved connecting with communities and involving stakeholders and enabling shared decision making and developing services. And he developed and led the Trust's Artist in Residence programme. That's really interesting, which provided the foundation for Creative Minds, which works with community organisations to deliver creative activities to promote recovery. And this approach was co-produced with participants, promotes peer-led projects, and operates more like a social movement. Phil, if you'd introduce yourself and anything else you want to say, and introduce Dave, that would be great. And I'll just hand over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I can't change that name. It's my wife's account, so it doesn't
we quite like it. Do you want me to put your slides up for you?
Yeah, please. Yeah. Dave, do you want to just do a quick introduction to yourself before you're going to do the second slide, aren't you?
I'm Dave Watson. I'm the Creative Minds developer for South and West Yorkshire, which involves enabling people in the communities and hospital settings primarily to develop initiatives of their own making into projects for health and well-being.
Thank you. Just say we were intending to have Joan with us this morning as well, but she's not well. Joan is amazing person who leads a peer-led singing group in Barnsley, but we call her the real Bard of Barnsley. She's a poet, performance poet, and she's brilliant at that as well. So it's a shame she couldn't be here today, but me and Dave will try and compensate. Can we have first slide, Heather?
Can you see the slide up?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. I think, as Heather said, this approach developed from people, really, from people in our dialogue groups. My role was to get in the trust was to get people kind of having more of a say about how services develop and how the trust develops. And one of the things that was coming through really strongly was that creativity helps people, and we should be doing more of it. We should be helping to facilitate that. And we had an artist in residence program prior to Creative Minds, and it evaluated so well, and people really responded well to it. But it was like all these things, it was short-term funding, and the funding ran out and we couldn't do any more of it. So our chief exec at the time wanted to look at the trust mission and wanted to kind of a less medical kind of mission. That was his intention, but this mission that's up there on the screen, people living well in their community and reaching their potential, that was the mission that emerged after talking to around 5,000 people. And I think in terms of our development, we developed at the same time, really. We did some workshops to develop a strategy for how we'd do more creativity in the trust. And that kind of just resonated with people because we'd already been talking about it and people had already had a taster of it, I suppose. So it had grounds to grow. I think the soft and fluffy element that I talked about in the title, I think a lot of clinicians kind of saw creativity as a bit soft and fluffy and not really delivering proper clinical outcomes. And very early on, we we saw people's lives transformed by creativity. We saw people really finding a passion, and that kind of drove us on, really. That we could see that this had a lot of potential, really. In terms of the mission, we use that probably every day, because our mission before this is 10 years ago. We've been going 10 years now, and that mission's evolved slightly, but it's roughly the same mission for the trust. We may have had something about keeping people well and reducing their symptoms, or something very medical, but that people living well in their community and reaching their potential just really kind of resonated with how we were working, and the two went hand in hand. And I think if you got a chief exec who's supporting something like this, it helps really. One of the big things, talking about jargon and how you connect with people, we put the strategy originally into a magazine format, and we sent that magazine round GP surgeries, our CMHTs, all clinical kind of settings within the trust, really. And again, that brought it to life a bit more. I think that strategies can be black and white documents that sit on a shelf and nobody see. And we just felt with this one, we wanted to really connect with people, and it did. We had GPs, surgeries ringing us up and saying, "Can we have some more magazines?" which had never happened before. So I think it kind of evolved and grew and developed. And I think one of the factors that was really important in that was we originally, because we had an artist in residence, we were originally thinking an arts strategy. And when we started talking to people, we decided on creativity in a broader definition. So we don't just do arts. You can see from the pictures below, we do a variety of things, really. Sports, we had a Good Mood Football League, and we still have. We do rock climbing, we do other outdoor pursuits. It's kind of a real broad definition, really. So that again, that connected with people. I think passion and soul and restoring hope, meaning and purpose, I think Heather mentioned that in the introduction, really, was key, and it was really important. And I think where people have lost that through being unwell, we can help people connect and regain some of that, really. Partnership and match funding, we became a charity in 2015, and since then we've been able to apply for our own funding and stand on our own 2 feet a bit more. We still get donations from the trust, and the trust, we're a linked charity and a charity. We're a charity in our own right, but we're linked to the trust, so we're still employed by the NHS, but we work for the charity, really. So it's quite an unusual position that we're in, really, and that really helps to connect people, because we're kind of like we call ourselves like a Trojan horse. We're inside this NHS organisation, and we bring out all these wonderful creative people who work with people who use trust services. It's definitely non-medical and non-judgmental, and warmth and compassion is part of how we see this kind of developing, really. The non-judgmental is really important for people who feel like in clinical settings very often they're judged about how they look all the time, or how they're kind of acting, whereas in these settings, these creative settings, it's really non-judgmental. Empowerment's used a lot. I think this is quite an empowering approach, and I think it is more of a kind of an asset-based approach. There's a lot of peer support in all the groups that we do. People connect through their passion, through the skills and that they've developed through the creative activities, and some of those activities have become peer-led. So if people want control of the activity, they set up their own group. They find a passion, they set up their own group, and they start doing it themselves with a little bit of support from us. We can give constituted groups up to £1,000 to get going, but they never spend that money. They kind of negotiate a cheap deal on a room. They buy their own tea and coffee. So they're very sustainable, these small groups, these peer-led groups, and that might be something we talk about later, really. I think the social movement and people getting behind it, I think being an NHS organisation and a charity, it's enabled us to step outside the trust and be a bit in between. And we're not kind of, it's not a service like an NHS service. It has become much more fluid and much more flexible, and people connect with us, and we get kind of invited to service user conferences to talk about this, because they see us as something different, really, and slightly detached from the NHS. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'll pass on to Dave, and Dave's going to talk about one of our areas. We cover Kirklees, Calderdale, Barnsley and Wakefield, and Dave's going to talk about some of the developments that have happened in Barnsley over the last few months, last few years. So I'll pass on to Dave. Heather, if you could move the slide on.
Thanks, Phil. So Creative Minds Barnsley, as Phil said, is just one quarter of what we cover, really, and a couple of the projects here that would be really nice to highlight gives a bit of an indication of the breadth of what we're able to do. As Phil said, we kind of straddle the third sector and the NHS, which means we can bridge a lot of chasms, really, between things, because the NHS can be perceived as a little bit of a fortress sometimes by people trying to get to the inside. So I'll start covering the buddy scheme first, and we'll do them in order. The buddy scheme was something that we worked with public health on. It was a pot of money to reach out to people, specifically men who were working age, that might be at risk of self-harm and suicide. And we thought, right, what we'd do is set up a system of volunteers that would have an interest, a creative interest preferably, that we could use to draw people in to combat social isolation, get them involved. So the buddies, initially we contact people digitally or by phone, have a conversation, build a little bit of a rapport with them. And then what we do is we get the buddy to meet them and take them out. And it can be anything. Rock climbing's becoming a really interesting one that we never saw coming. It can be going to musical gigs, it can be going to a gym, it can be going to an art gallery, it can be going to another project, which is a good one to get people involved and build up a network, improve the confidence, and hopefully it's a wonderful way to divert people away from what can be social isolation, the very negative connotations of that. The buddy scheme's doing really well. It's now moved on to and involved in the accreditation. The accreditation, we looked at what's already out there. I'm very conscious that people have been locked away with lockdown for a long period of time, and people haven't been as physically active as they might have liked. There's a lot of interest generated around that coming out of lockdown. So we looked at local gyms and sports clubs, right up from the sort of statutory size, the big chain gyms, right down to little local running clubs. And we made an offer whereas we can train their staff in mental health awareness, much the same way as you'd have a physical first aider on site. We have a mental health first aider on site with a lot of these now. And we've built it up so everybody in the district's now becoming accredited to a certain standard. But we've done really well. It's a strong partnership with public health locally. And it's great fun to be involved in as well, this one. We've got sort of a lovely competitive edge to it between the clubs, so everybody's getting involved all the way across all sports, all districts. It's really inclusive because we've got little groups within this that are covering dementia football. We've got things right down to children and young people's football. We've got cricket, we've got tennis, we've got running clubs. We've even got things like coming out of it now that people are asking if they can have like little gardening clubs and local park clubs involved in it, because it's physically moving and getting involved and getting out and doing things rather than a heavy focus on sport. So that's done really well. And that, again, that's big. That's quite a big project. We've managed to pull something around £150,000 worth of funding to that now from different areas, which is massive in the grand scheme of things. Safety nets was a very small project that came from a gentleman who worked at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and he recognised the value of working with children that had contact with mental health services, who would be benefiting from some physical exercise. We helped him to get that on its feet and approached local football clubs, rugby clubs, bit of some notoriety, not the smaller end ones. So we're looking at league clubs. Safety Nets has now gone across Derbyshire, South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, moving into other districts. We've got Barnsley Football Club, Rotherham, Doncaster Football Club. We're looking at Leeds United, Chesterfield. We've got Wakefield Wildcats, Doncaster Knights, and there's about 8 other different clubs now getting involved with that. It's also got some notoriety now from the English Football League. It's gone from a tiny little acorn of a project into a massive oak tree, and I think the hopes and aspirations of Safety Nets is eventually it will be something that's perhaps franchised out or become a national charity in its own right. And that involves an hour of the coaches at the clubs working with our CAMS services to bring children in that are having a great deal of difficulty, create a bit of a peer network for them. We look anywhere between 8 to 12 children at a time, and we do an hour of coaching with them and sports and activity. And we also have 2 members of the CAMS teams go down that do an hour of psychosocial education after the physical activity part of the session. What we found was the kids were a little bit bored and didn't want things to be too prescriptive with the educational side of it. So we turned it on its head and said, you tell us what it is, the day-to-day problems you encounter that we can look at in these groups. And for example, one of the ones that came up was social media. So we set up a full session driven by the children and what they were telling us on how to keep themselves safe on social media and the internet, what information was acceptable, how to recognise if people were trying to do things that were inappropriate, and how to handle bullying. And it became marvellous. And some of the children that went through initially came back to volunteer for the next groups that came through. The results that we had from that is absolutely staggering. And we're also working now with the University of York, who've just done a paper on safety nets, and they're doing another paper, so we can apply for really large pots of funding to get that going. And like I said, I'm particularly happy with this project. I think it's amazing. I've seen the results of it firsthand, and I want this to become something that, like I said, from a small acorn of a project into a mighty oak tree. Peer-led groups, I think more reflectively, is the smaller groups that we have. Like Phil said, we've got things down for. If Joan had been able to join us today, I would have loved to have. I would have loved for you guys to listen to her. She's somewhere. I think she described herself as somewhere between Pam Ayres and Peter Kay. She's amazing. So Joan set up a number of groups for us, from creative writing and more recently a small choir group, which sits on a Friday morning. Post-COVID, they met at a local Salvation Army Centre. I think that was the largest space they could find where they are, and it's up for all the district, but it tends to be something quite local, and it's an older end choir which covers just people that might be a little bit lonely and don't have a great deal of things they can do. But they've gone on to win awards. They've through lockdown, amazingly, they moved on to YouTube and Zoom and conducted the choirs from home. Just the adaptability of what they can do is outstanding. We also work with many other smaller organisations. As Phil said, these organisations might only take £1,000 from us and could have anywhere from 12 to 100 members, but they can stretch £1,000 over a 12-month period and do amazing things with it. And they're always fundraising, and the health benefits that you see from it are second on. People that are quite ill, physical health and mental health go hand in hand, as we know, and to get people out and improve the mental health generally brings the physical health back along. And these groups are just absolutely amazing. I cannot stress enough the benefits that you can see from when you go out. I'm lucky and fortunate because I can go out and actually spend some time with these things. So I think I'll leave it there. because I've waffled on long enough about these, and I'll just hand you back over to Phil now.
Oh, hi. Yeah, Heather, just the last slide was just our contact details. That was Joan's slide. That's a poetry book, the front of a poetry book. And she wrote the Yorkshire tea reference. She wrote a play called Yorkshire Tea, and it was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it's a shame she couldn't have been here today. Just the final slide is our contact details. So if anybody wants to be in touch, there's some details there. That's a real whistle-stop tour, really.
We've got an audience here that will pick it over, believe you me. We've already got some questions. I'm going to hold those questions, and I'm going on now to Matt Jennings. Dr. Matt Jennings is a lecturer in drama at Ulster University, originally from Sydney, no dramas. He's worked as an artist and a teacher in Australia, Ireland, UK, Italy, France, Netherlands, Morocco, Hong Kong, and South Africa. But he's been based in Northern Ireland, because I think he married a lady there, since 2001. And he's worked extensively in arts education, community arts, and applied drama, and has a PhD in community drama and conflict transformation in Northern Ireland. We had a very interesting chat about that since 1998. He also provides communication training for health and social care professionals, and is the co-founder of Health Action Training Company with his partner in this, Pat Deeney, Chief Executive of the Health Action Training Company. He's a senior fellow of the United Kingdom Higher Education Academy and an experienced external examiner for the higher education sector. Over 30 years experience as nurse educator and nurse consultant, with experience in curriculum development and educational program management at undergraduate and postgraduate level for healthcare professionals. Pat has extensive experience in healthcare simulation, especially in the realm of community resilience and disaster response training. Fantastic.
But anyway, yeah, I'm Matt Jennings, co-founder of Health Action Training with Pat Deeney, and also Carl Tizard-Kleister, who's completing a PhD about our methodology. I first met Pat about 8 or maybe 9, 8 at least anyway, years ago, when Pat was the senior lecturer in nursing at Ulster University in the McGee campus in Londonderry, and I was a lecturer in drama. And initially, Pat was telling me how, with the role play assessments that nurses have to do at the end of their degree in order to register as nurses, that the students were finding it very difficult. They were struggling to take it seriously. They were getting stressed out about it and so on. And if you look at the research on nursing simulation, that's sort of characteristic of role play for assessment throughout the world. So initially, it was just to sort of help nurses get through their role play by giving them a few basic tips to, one, relax, and to be more convincing, and to make those role play assessments more useful and realistic. And over the last 8 years, we've developed this methodology further and further. And as I said, with Carl Tizard-Kleister, the fellow who's doing a PhD along with us. And now we have these courses, graduate certificates accredited by the Royal College of Nursing, to use applied drama, as you mentioned, Heather, but also actor training techniques to improve not only nurses' person-centered communication, and we'll talk a little bit about the person-centered nursing, which was something we weren't intending to do, but we just sort of noticed as we were doing it that it sort of happened. So you might be going, what's the difference between applied drama and actor? Is when you use drama techniques to help individuals and groups in any community setting to deal with usually social but also personal issues. Basically, it's anything that might take place off a main stage theatre that, say, builds communication, self-esteem, community cohesion. So it includes theatre and prisons, arts and health projects. So I've done a lot of arts and health projects, similar to that fantastic project that Phil and Dave were talking about, where you use drama or carnival or music to sort of build community cohesion and to develop sort of confidence, and also those 5 principles from the new economic framework of the be active, notice, keep learning, give, and I always forget one. What's the other one? Notice, active, learning, give. Oh, and socialize. So that arts and health approach, where you're supporting those principles of well-being through creative activities, group activities, is fantastic. But what we've got the role play that the nurses already do, which stresses people out and they find difficult to do well. You've got your community or applied drama, where anybody can do it, and it's inclusive and it's based upon your own interests and it's participant-led. And then you have your actor training, which is the techniques they use to teach professional actors to act, like Judi Dench and all that. So we combine the 3. Yeah, so we have the ethos of applied drama, where it's all inclusive and it's all participant-led. So when we explore, say, a role play, it's drawn from people's clinical experience. We ask them to start with sharing a successful communication situation, something where it's turned out the way they wanted to. And we then explore that using the acting techniques to identify what did they do that worked and how can they transfer that to more difficult situations. And so that's the applied drama approach and ethos, and it's games-based and it's fun, it's creative learning, and it's the same sort of activities I would have done with children or adults with severe learning disabilities, so it's accessible. And then with the role play, we also have off-the-shelf scenarios based on clinical experiences of particularly sort of client-centered. So, for instance, how people with dementia have experienced healthcare, how people with learning disabilities, people with English as a second language, and so on. And then the actor training. And the actor training element includes things that are based on sort of yoga, martial arts, mindfulness, because most actor training for the last 100 years has included things like centering yourself, grounding yourself, doing breathing exercises to get your breathing diaphragmatic, and becoming aware. So it's similar in some senses to the mindfulness exercises you might get in, say, Action for Happiness or other kinds of groups. And that supports resilience in and of itself. If I can become more present and let go of my pain body, as Eckhart Tolle calls it, of worrying about the future or regretting the past or whatever, I'm more present here and now. And that connects us with this element of person-centered nursing, which is sympathetic presence. And it's when we started talking about sympathetic presence, that's when I got really interested in the person-centered nursing framework, as Pat was explaining it, because it was presented and it's described in the person-centered nursing framework by Professor Brendan McCormick and Tanya McCants, who wrote that. And we're very, very lucky to have them on our team. They're co-supervisors of Carl's PhD, and they're also members of our advisory board of the Health Action Training Company. But sympathetic presence, when I came across it, because it resonates with stuff in drama, was the idea that empathy is neither possible nor desirable in nursing, which startles a few people, especially when Pat and I went to Oxford to an empathy conference and started out with that line. It was controversial. In the sense that the way I explain it with working with nurses and drama students is like, if I come to the hospital with a broken arm and I'm like, oh, geez, it hurts, right? And you don't want the nurse to be going, well, yeah, my arm's really sore as well, right? Because you want that nurse to be able to help you relieve the pain of your arm. And also, even if their arm is sore, it's not the same pain you're feeling in your arm. But sympathetic presence, by being present here and now, mindful, if you will, can then engage with compassion in action by paying attention to how the other person feels, acknowledging that the way I feel is different, and then helping them with how they feel. The other element of actor training that we then use is actions and objectives, which comes from Konstantin Stanislavski, big Russian dude in the actor field for the last 120 years. And that's basically, what am I doing and why am I doing it? And who am I doing it to? Very important that it's always towards another person, right? So do I want this patient to get back to bed, okay? Because it's dangerous if they walk around, on medication or something. So what action do I play? What do I do to them? Do I reassure them? Do I coax them? Do I cajole them? Do I distract them? Do I warn them? Yeah. So we use those kind of techniques, which are not apparently that common in applied drama, because a lot of people who do applied and community drama haven't had actor training, whereas I did have actor training in the early 90s when I came to Northern Ireland. I used that when I was asked to do the community and applied drama stuff. So you specifically look at an event or a situation in your clinical practice. Might be, breaking bad news. Might be dealing with a family member who's been upset at the treatment of their loved one. It could be team related. So it's like, how do we communicate within a multidisciplinary team or management about how to improve things? So it's, and then we apply that to your experiences. So it's taking arts and health approaches that are creating well-being through doing these wonderful social and creative things together, but it's combining that with the specificity of what do I do in this scenario where I have this set of clinical tasks to perform, and then also the after training. So how can I get better at looking at what, or working with somebody? And it takes away some of the tricks or the elements of communication training that I call tricks, which are a little bit one size fits all. Communication is, it's always contextual, it's always relation, it's always what's happening between us now. So I don't know if you've heard, sometimes nurses are told, use someone's first name on a regular basis. But if I use someone's first name, Heather, on a regular basis, Heather, then it's not necessarily more reassuring, Heather. It might actually come across as annoying, Heather, if I said Heather's name, Heather, over and over again. So sometimes you get people who've been told the way to do person-centered communication is to use this set of scripts of behaviors and statements, whereas what we're about is helping people to engage with what's actually happening between them and other people in the moment. And one thing that emerged from a workshop we were doing just the other day with a group of nurses, and we've had 4 cohorts of nurses complete the graduate certificate so far. We're on the 5th, and we have a trainer's course coming up where we're going to train people to become health action trainers within their own context. And Gemma Smith, who's here on the call from Donegal, is somebody who's hoping to do that within Donegal in the Republic. We're based in Northern Ireland, that's in the Republic. But the thing that emerged from the workshop the other day was an immediate and deep and experiential embodied understanding that if we are not actively paying attention to someone, we are consciously or unconsciously ignoring them, which might sound a bit obvious, but sometimes, you know, for instance, if we're busy sort of filling out a form or we're busy doing a clinical task, we forget what we're doing to the person in front of us. And this, I think, connects with that idea of soft and fluffy that Phil and Dave were talking about. In some of the educational literature for nursing, they talk about the soft communication skills against the hard clinical skills. And although I completely understand nurses and nursing students who would sort of feel a bit awkward at the idea of doing some drama, in fact, they're terrified of the word drama, and they're able to do a 13-hour shift in an A&E department dealing with people who've been mutilated in car accidents. But a little bit of playing drama games can be scary. I get it. But also, if you look at the amount of time spent on developing clinical task-based approaches as against the amount of time actually practicing and getting better at so-called soft skills of communication, like when we were doing it at Ulster University, we would have 1.5 hour workshop in the 3rd week of the final semester on one module, and then we would come back later to give them 15 minutes of feedback on their role plays, and that was it. And we had 1 or 2 people saying, how come we're spending all this time on the drama? It's like, because they're spending all of their time on the mechanistic paradigm, the approach to health training that is about, you know, fixing people's broken machines, whereas we're about dealing with. And as you said at the beginning, we start with centering ourselves, because if we want to be person-centered, we need to be a centered person. Then we do attention-based processes where we're looking at just paying attention to other people. And then the thing that the active training provides is intention. What do we want? How do we get it? And also, very importantly, what does the other person want? Because we might say, oh, they're a very difficult or they're a very angry patient or colleague or whatever. If somebody's getting angry, that tells you that there's something that they want that they're trying to get by threatening you or insulting you or dismissing you or whatever. So you use those kind of things as clues to find out what it is that somebody wants. But anyway, that's enough for me. Pat, do you want to talk through the slides?
Yeah, okay. Just to add to what Matt's saying, it really is a shift in focus. It's a new perspective on the teaching of communication skills, because I think what's happened, like, you could be cynical and you could say, you know, you can't teach communication skills by PowerPoint, but really it's a real emphasis on the experiential learning. And the one word that sticks out for me is embodiment of communication. It's actually, it's making it much more than just a cognitive thing, you know, and staff would often say to you, and students often say, what do you say in this situation, particularly when they're considering, you know, difficult and stressful communication? What do I say? We we accept that. We won't give them phraseology, but we focus on giving them actions to play, and they get an opportunity then to practice playing at dealing and using actions and trying to achieve their objectives, which makes it different, makes it very different. Anyway, slides.
From the beginning's grand. Okay, cool. There we go.
Okay, and if we spend a minute on this one, we have quite a lot of different courses that we offer, from 2-day or 12-hour programs right up to 6-day or 35-hour, and we work with quite a range of groups. Like we've done some work with nurses that work in tele-triage recently, and Matt's referred to the work we did with the undergraduates at Ulster University. But this is our core module. Our core course is this one. This is a 35-hour graduate certificate, and obviously we use applied drama and actor training, and it's highly participative, and that's quite important in these days, because nurses have to revalidate every 3 years, and they need evidence of actually doing continuous professional development. And while the 35 hours meets that criteria, they also need at least 20 hours participatory learning. So you can see in the pandemic culture, that would be very difficult. But here, like, we have participatory workshops in Zoom. So, it's not an online course as such. And really, the attractive thing for the nurses that come to these programs is that they will gain new skills and expertise in dealing with complex situations. And that's the most important. So next slide, Heather, please. Now this, hopefully everybody can see this if it's on full screen, but it's quite important here. It's always important to actually prove in a way that training actually works and shifts both knowledge, skills, and attitude. But in our programs, what we do is we actually we focus on resilience. We use an international scale, developed by Connor Davison in the United States, and we ask people to score the resilience at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program, and you can see that our scores actually, increase, by about 20% after about a 6 to 7 week period, and even we did a course recently, which was quite interesting. It was an intensive course where we did it over 6 days. It was 3 days 1 week, 3 days the next week, so it was over a 2 week period, and we still found that the resilience scores improved, and that was quite, it was quite significant, we thought. The other thing as well is that when we look closely at this person-centered framework, there's many different elements and processes involved in it, but one key area for me is actually, self-awareness. And you can see, if you actually look at the figures, you can see that self-awareness improves. And also there's an overall, 10.5% increase in overall perceptions of person-centeredness. Now, it's important to point out that when nurses come to these programs, their scores on person-centeredness are usually pretty high, certainly when they consider their own value system. When they actually look at the elements of the person-centered framework in relation to their organisation, that's where they run into lots of difficulties. And Matt will comment on that in a moment, I think. But
yes, for instance, if you look at that, you see physical environment, 7.84%. So even though there's not a lot an individual nurse doing a Zoom workshop can do about the physical environment of the person-centeredness of their ward or their hospital or the community centre, there's still some increase in their perception of that environment as being person-centered, but it's why the median becomes 10.5% when you see knowing self at 17.69, or interpersonal skills at 11.79, or clarity of beliefs and values at 13.52. So the things that are outside of the control of the individual nurse offset the things that they have been enhanced in their skill set. By the way, I just want to point out this is from one of the recent iterations of the graduate certificate. So we have done the same kind of questionnaire-based evaluation of the last, as I say, I think 4 courses we've done, and they've all come in somewhere between 10 to 20%, usually around 15, 16% for both resilience on the Connor-Davidson scale and person-centeredness on the PCPR scale. In fact, this is the lowest single improvement we've had in person-centeredness in any of the cohorts. And also, I'd like to point out the course satisfaction of 93%.
Yeah, course satisfaction, and that's for me, that's the experiential learning, the dialogic pedagogy as well, the discussions we have with people. And while people have lots of reservations and fears even about doing, drama, as Matt pointed out there, Gemma, who's here in the audience today, actually experienced the course. And at the beginning, it takes a while for people to actually gain confidence and begin to play again. But I wanted to make this point about person-centeredness. Sometimes when we think about communication, we only think of patients and families. And in nursing, we use this term patient-centered, and children's nursing, we use family-centered. Like, person-centered is much broader. It's actually talking about the whole organization and possibly within the community as well, because I know that some work in disaster response and preparedness, particularly in Scandinavia, we talked about person-centeredness in community as well is something that it's almost like it's a life philosophy in a way. And this is what the sympathetic presence is, something that actually is helpful for everyone, not just actually for nurses, because we're hypothesizing away, or we're suggesting that sympathetic presence might actually make life easier for nurses, where nurses might be putting a lot of effort and emotion into being empathetic, and when in actual fact they're feeling into, when in actual fact, the idea of sympathetic presence is a very good standard for patient care. There's no issue with, it's still relational, it's still caring, it's still compassionate, all of these things, but it may not require as much emotional involvement, just so that you can actually spread yourself a little bit more thinly across the community or the group. Next slide, Heather, please.
Yeah. So I was just going to say to that, Pat, because if you look at the research, empathy scores on questionnaire-based tools with nursing students decline the longer they study, and the more exposure they have to patient groups, the further they decline, and the same over the career of the nurse. So perhaps an increase in sympathetic presence is an antidote to that decrease in empathy, because people sort of burn out. So the resilience comes from, I can pay attention to what I'm doing with you now, how you're feeling now, and how I'm feeling now, and then like an actor walking off stage, leave it aside, and also not try to feel exactly the same thing as another person. Allow myself to feel what I feel, but not necessarily force myself to try to feel pain or sadness when somebody else does.
And the medical students, not sure, did you look at social work students as well? But the medical students actually, it's a similar trend. So these are some of the comments actually that were made, qualitative comments made by people who participated in our courses. And you can see that actually, confidence, communication skills, and the shared learning approach is valuable, and they just enjoyed it. They had what we would commonly call here good crack and fun, and when they got the fun side of it, when they began to internalize the idea, this is actually fun learning. I term it as hard fun, which is sometimes a term used in problem-based learning, but you learn much better if you're having good crack, as I say. So being aware of my presence and objectives and action. So these words from actor training are now creeping into how these nurses actually structure and think and reflect on their communication. I think there's just one more slide left, Hannah. Yeah, it's just our contact details.
That'll probably do for now. I'm seeing some fascinating questions already popping up in the chat box. Yeah. So shall we have a proper chat?
Okay, well, there's lots of stuff going on in the chat box. I've been too busy listening to clock them all. But I know Joanne had exactly the same thought about creating. Oh, first of all, I forgot completely to thank you. Both presentations were fantastic. I'm too eager to get onto the questions, but I want to thank you all for that.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you
Because
so
I've
much.
been writing down questions like there's no there's
Oh, look, clap emojis. There's clap emojis. Let's see if
clap emojis as well. That's very, very good. I like clap emojis. Joanne, do you want to ask your question about placements? Because that was my first thought about placements in Creative Minds projects.
And I'm just looking to see if we've still got Michelle. Oh, yeah, Michelle's hit on as well. Just because I'm dabbling in this really, and I know that Michelle and colleagues have got a much tighter grip on what's happening, certainly within England at the minute. So one thing that I read when I scanned the new contract or proposed contract from Health Education England for providers, which is about 270 pages long and huge, was that there was a place for third sector. So I was thinking about, okay, hang on, my little tiny charity, we could maybe host some students. Wouldn't that be absolutely amazing? And so I started looking at it from our perspective, really. And it's easier in a way because we are registered nurses, so we can do that.
Do you want to say who your organisation is for those?
Yeah, so it's the Foundation Nursing Studies Funds to our supporters. We work again really closely with QMU, Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, and Brendan and colleagues, and we are part of 2 international communities of practice. So we're part of ICOP, which Brendan and colleagues lead in Scotland, and then we're also members of the IPDC, which is the International Practice Development Collaborative. So our work sits within person-centred framework, but we look at practice development as well. So we're that kind of glue in the middle, we absolutely take and we pinch with pride. All research we're exposed to, all the PhDs, everything that's coming through that's really exciting, and then we can test it out. And we test it out and we evaluate it. We use 4th and 5th generation evaluation, which is very similar, I would imagine, to Matt and Pat, which would be great to have a chat about. But really trying to push the system to stop tick boxing and really looking at lived experience and participatory evaluation and emancipatory kind of learning, really. So we fit with what you're doing, I think, brilliantly well. But our focus is really on culture. So historically, Fonds has kind of we've worked with nurses predominantly in the workplace, at the front line, social care, health, who have got some level of accountability, responsibility for a team. And since I got there 2 years ago, I'm blasting it out of the water, slowly, but very surely, because I said, hang on a minute, what about the sandwiching? What about the undergraduates? And what about the executive nurse directors, the board, and all, the commissioners, policymakers? We've all got to get this, or else it's not going to work. So very, very slowly, we're working towards that. So I'm really interested in pushing boundaries, certainly around placement opportunities, even if it's for a week, a day, hopping onto some Zoom calls, whatever, but exposing our undergraduates right across the pathway, social workers, paramedics, nurses, doctors, dentists, I don't care, really, anybody on that pathway, really exposing them to the differences that working in a charity brings to your life. It's been emancipatory for me over the last 2 years, having spent 30 years in government and NHS. And I won't go back. I wouldn't go back now, ever, ever, ever. So that's been really, really important for me. So I think that's kind of part of why I was just saying, what about this framework? But Michelle, you might have a bit more up to date understanding of what that might mean for charities that perhaps aren't led by a regulated professional like a nurse or a doctor or a dentist or an AHP. So I'll go on mute. And is that all right, Michelle? I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
All right, yeah, thanks.
Apologies for croaking. My teenagers infected me from sixth form. Yeah, so yeah, apologies. You raised a really interesting point. So of course we've got the HE tariff at the moment, and you're right, it's quite a big document. And there's a lot of work from, certainly Salford, we're trying to hopefully encourage and support our third sector partners to put in for that tariff and look at the quality assurance that's needed to enable that. But one of the big key issues that you've raised, Joanne, is the fact that a lot of organisations don't have qualified registrants to supervise and support the students. So there is a lot of work, certainly within GM, around this sort of triple SA agreement, where we're looking at how you do outreach, the kind of different models that we could use. Also identifying those charities that do have registrants, where we can send students for full placements and be assessed. Other placements that might not have registrants, maybe we set up a kind of arm's length approach. So I know that, for example, the University of Chester have recently modelled using hourly paid lecturers to do that. We are hopefully looking at sort of clinical expansion funding to try and support roles within the university to reach out to be able to do that. So that you've got not just that support for the students, but also support for our partners in third sector, so that they know what they're doing, how they're doing it, getting reassurance, feedback, etc., etc. So I think it's a challenge at the moment, and I think it's one of the big tick boxes that's needed for the tariff. So I know that it's being tackled. I know it's not just being tackled in Greater Manchester, but nationally they're really looking at this and trying to fathom out how and what they do and how they manage this. So I don't know whether you've managed to hear me with my croaky voice, but is that kind of
So just for the non-nurses, because there are some non-nurses and non-health professionals on this, the tariff is the paying of a third sector organisation to host a student, and the issues around a registrant is about, which means having a registered healthcare professional, is about making that interpretation between what the student is seeing and the curriculum and what they should be learning. Am I right there?
Yeah, so obviously all our students, whether we're social work, nursing, OT, and EHPs, are professionally regulated, and our professions develop the standards that we have to then base our curriculum on. And those standards include proficiencies, and those proficiencies can only be assessed and signed off by a registrant. Yeah. So if you've got a student going out doing a 6-week placement with, for example, 42nd Street in GM, they do a lot of work with children and young people in supporting their emotional well-being. They use arts and a whole range of different approaches, and they have sort of psychologists in there, they have nurses in there, which is fine for them. But if you get another organisation that doesn't have that registrant, then they might struggle to take students and be able to sign off the proficiencies. So there's a bit of a balance you have to add.
Yeah. So you had a question also, Michelle, early on around Phil and Dave's presentation, and about that idea of bridging, didn't you? Between, that was a very interesting point about relationships and bridging between the NHS and communities. Do you want to expand on that, Michelle, or was that it really?
No, sorry. I was kind of it, but I think there's one of the things that we're trying to encourage at the minute is secondary care organisations being aware of the brilliant work out there, so that we're not just sending our patients out to same old, and part of that work around getting students embedded out there is that feeding back to secondary care organisations to say, gee, this is brilliant, fantastic opportunity. Instead of sending that suicidal teenager back to the GP, why don't we send them back to 40 seconds? I think there's that bridge. I think I'd be really interested to know how you've done it.
I think it's two ways. Somebody who's been in the third sector for 11 years, it's about understanding who to talk to and trying to communicate why you should be part of the conversation as well. And anyway, but just be interested in Phil and Dave's views on that sort of bridging role.
Is it all right if I just sort of jump in and comment on the previous comment while I think of it, because otherwise I forget when I was mentioning
that, and then we'll get on to that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it was mentioned about other disciplines, because our approach uses the same set of techniques, and what changes is the scenarios that you're dealing with in your everyday working life. We can and do work with people from all sorts of other professions, not just allied health professions or doctors or administrators and so on, but also teachers. Recently, I did a sort of a full day's work with a bunch of secondary school teachers, social workers, and in conversation with the local police service. So just to say that that idea of team building between disciplines, or working across disciplines, or working with different groups of people working in different kinds of areas, the health action training approach can not only be useful to everybody working in any kind of discipline where you have to communicate, but also can help to create those connections between a multidisciplinary team that's
Really
working with somebody. But anyway,
important.
just wanted to say that before I forgot about it.
All right.
So carry on, Phil and Dave. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry. What do you reckon, bridging the two worlds? It feels like two different
Yeah.
sides.
I mean, being a charity hosted by the NHS is obviously it's easier to bridge because we're in it, and we can bring people across. Linking back to that element of learning. I mean, when we had an artist in residence, the final residency was a third sector organisation rather than an individual, and it was Hoot in Huddersfield, and they invited me to be on the board, and I spent 7 years on the board of Hoot. And in terms of linking and bridging, to understand how a third sector organisation operates, from hand to mouth a lot of the time, there were several times over those years where they could have collapsed because they didn't have enough money coming in. So being on the board and being an active person in that organisation was the best learning experience for me.
Yeah.
I'm a social worker by background, so I have got a professional background, but and that we have done placements, we've done shadowing. We are working with the social work department at Huddersfield University to set up some proper placements, but it just takes time, really. In terms of bridging with partners, we have over 120 partners that we work with across our patch, and they are all now they are from procurement terms, they are preferred suppliers. So the link between the organisation and the third sector is much easier when they're preferred suppliers. What we used to have, Hoot used to come back to me quite a lot of times saying, we've got chance of £10,000 if you could match it, or even £5,000. I can't remember what it was, but when I tried to get that money from the organisation, it took 3 months to get it agreed that it was a great idea to do it. In those 3 months, that opportunity had gone. So, the NHS had to be more reactive, much more quick in its decision making. So now that all our partners are our preferred suppliers, we don't have to go through all the 3 supplier quotes and all that kind of thing. It's decided that they are the best people to provide this kind of thing, and we use match funding. So when we have funding rounds, and Dave could say a bit more about this, when we have funding rounds, we match that money up so that whatever the project is that they're doing, we can match with it, and we have a multi kind of decision making that includes people who use services, really, and that again, it's much more integrated. And we hear from lots of organisations that say the NHS is a fortress, you can't work with them, the systems are too clumsy, they're too clunky, they can't make decisions. I mean, it works well, doesn't it, Dave, that kind of relationship we've got with third sector?
Yeah, it works really well. And something very simple that I had mentioned earlier on by you was the use of jargon and terminology and things like that. So some of what we do with a little bit of a translation service as well. So we filter it down from the top across to peer networks and break it down and what that means and how we're going to do that. But then coming back the other way, we have to sort of try and fit some of that into jargon terms as well to filter back to the NHS. So it's not just the bridging of gap of putting the people together, it's getting people to understand each other's languages almost as well, and how the systems work and where the funding comes from, and because the NHS funding comes from the NHS primarily speaking, it's difficult then for the people certainly that we answer to see what's available in community and how difficult it is for communities to put their hands on money and where the funding is going to come from funding pots from other charities or from things that can apply from it. And that's also an important part of the bridging work that we do, not just connecting the organisations together.
And this is why I think it's important for students to see this. with fresh eyes before they get institutionalized. Because a lot of students these days are mature students, they've had lives before, and they come in, and it's trying to get at that point before they get into all the jargon, that they can actually see the world that they've just come from and the world that they've just entered, and that they can see all this going on. And then the other point that you were making there, Phil, was about the anchor institution role of large NHS organisations that can introduce that preferred supplier route, which for third sector organisations who live hand to mouth can actually give them some stability. I'm fortunate to be in a charity, being there in Greater Manchester that supports people with life-limiting illness, that's had a contract with the NHS for over 20 years. And that is rare. And yet every winter, we don't know whether we're going to be recontracted with, and who's our commissioner, because it all keeps moving around Manchester, Salford, Trafford and Tameside. So it's that reality that the students need to see, so that when they when they graduate, how can they help those organisations to become more sustainable? Yeah. Cool.
Just very quickly, it's what frustrates me about social prescribing. We were part of the development of that whole approach, and at the time it was they were bringing third sector along with them, and then they put all the money into link workers and forgot about funding the communities. So you can have 4,000 more link workers, but what are they going to link to if you don't invest in your communities? That's my soapbox moment over, but it does frustrate me.
Yes, many a nod there. Absolutely. Questions, people, from those who may not have asked questions? So I've got loads.
Well, I've got another response to the conversation you just had. This reminded me that when we did the initial kind of undergraduate training with the nursing students, that that module where they did a sort of a role play assessment that drama was helping with was built around clinical placement. So we did an introductory drama workshop to introduce them to the kind of key concepts, actions, objectives, given circumstances, breathing and centering and so on. Then they would go out on a 6-week clinical practice. Then they would come back and develop their role plays, and they would use the ideas and the techniques that we brought to them through that workshop as a way of reflecting on and improving the outcomes from specific events in their engagement in the community. And similarly, now that we're doing the 35-hour courses with the working nurses, every session we start with a debrief. Have you been able to use any of these particular techniques in your community visiting, community nursing, community groups, as well as clinical? And the applications kind of be often quite astonishing. I mean, Pat, remember that the nurse who was telling us that the night before he'd been a voluntary first responder and he'd been called to a cardiac arrest in a caravan park, and himself and another nurse were the voluntary first responders trying to deal with it. And he was doing the breathing exercises we taught him. He was on the phone to the paramedics trying to get them to turn up, thinking about what's my action, what's my objective. And then unfortunately, they lost the patient. And then he was again drawing on the stuff that we were doing to help soothe and reassure family members and the other nurse who was the first responder. So the way we do it is to develop and understand what's going on in your relationships and your work within communities, and then to practice and improve upon it. As against sometimes the jargon is just words. Like I was doing a gig playing saxophone with a nurse recently, and I was telling them about the work we were doing and saying about the person-centered nursing framework and sympathetic presence and all that. He said, yeah, I remember writing essays about all those terms. And I said, well, do you know what it means in practice? No idea. Right. So one of the difficulties we have is the stuff that they learn at university. How do we turn that into something they do in the real world with real people?
Okay, thank you.
I think Michelle had a question there.
Yeah, that's right.
Got a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to a previous point. I think that also links with your point, Matt, about you're right, they funded 4,000 link workers, so they funded the travel agent and not the destination. It's the classic phrase, isn't it, that's been used. And I wonder, because I personally see social prescribing schemes and the work in third sector is a great way to demonstrate personalised approaches, because it's about the wellbeing conversation, about what matters to the person rather than what's the matter with them. So it starts them on that journey. But I wonder whether or not the formation of integrated care systems, whether or not there's going to be opportunities for third sector colleagues within that, and whether or not commissioning will come through that as well. I don't know, because they're still kind of new, aren't they? But I wonder whether or not anyone had any intel into that.
So, Michelle, if you remember, I can't remember how long ago it was now, but when we looked at the legislation for the integrated care systems for England, there was a duty to collaborate with the third sector. What that means, again, we need to keep a really close eye on it. But what I'm trying to do at the minute in my own, where I live, in Surrey, is to start making connections with the chief nurse for the interim chief nurse for the integrated care system, to say, how's it all going? What's going on? Just, trying to build relationships with somebody who perhaps I wouldn't have known before. And in fact, indeed, I didn't know her. My relationships really have been with providers, so NHS trusts, etc. So it's about us as well, having that awareness right up and down and across, and doing that matrix work, because it may be that we might be able to influence our own local areas, because they should have autonomy to some degree. And if we can use certainly all the work that you're doing, Michelle, with the group around the curricula and stuff like, this meeting today, it's powerful. This is a community action. This is a social movement in itself now, isn't it, Heather? Kind of a sub one underneath your huge career social movement, really. So yeah, I'm optimistic. I know it's going to be a battle, but we've been here before. We'll do it again, won't we, Lynn?
Yeah, I've got my hand up, Heather. I don't know if you're ignoring me or you can't see my hand.
No, I think it's the background on your wall, I've just noticed. So sorry. Go for it, Lynn.
Not at all. So the ICP guidance came out yesterday for nerds like me that want to read it. But it's a committee of the ICS, so it's not a statutory entity in its own right. However, it does require that there be third sector representation, people with lived experience representation, Health Watch, local authority representation, and one Director of Adult Social Services or Director of Children's Services to be agreed. It does want asset-based community development approaches, and it talks about the importance of place. Now, I could talk at great length, and I know we don't have time, because there is such a difference between the ICS, big footprint, and place, local, community, and so on. Actually, in South Yorkshire with Rob Webster, I mean, oh, gosh, I wish I lived there. I mean, it is, I'm looking at best practice, hearing you guys talk today, and also what Rob has done, both in terms of inclusion and as with the ICS in that area. But across the country, it's very different. So there is a huge opportunity. And yes, we do need to work together to address the inequity in power in what are the proposed structures. So sorry, that's going to be really boring to some of the people on the call, but we really need the voices of people on the call to influence what it looks like. Thanks.
Thanks. Can you, or you might have done already and I've not spotted, you put a link to that document, Lynn, in the chat?
I'll try, Heather. That's possibly a bit, but I did tweet it yesterday and today. I'll see what I can do.
All right, that'll be really good.
We just had a, I mean, that is starting to work in West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, where the integrated stuff around service transformation, that is starting some conversations. Rob's got another ally in West Yorkshire with Tracy Brabbin, been elected the new mayor of West Yorkshire, and she was former Coronation Street actress and big champion for us. She nominated as a charity for the at Westminster. So Rob and Tracy are kind of really working on that now. They want to kind of look at how arts and creativity and third sector organisations play a bigger role. So there'll be some of that coming through soon, really.
So there's a lot there about the leadership of the system You know, there's no accident that Creative Minds is in Rob Webster's patch, and Rob having that understanding of what makes people well, and having those allies around him across the sector that can make those changes happen. So it's also, as we develop that talent pipeline of leadership, that we start to feed these ideas through, so that people like Rob can speak to students about what it is that he does differently. I know that that's part of the 150 Leaders programme, which is an undergraduate programme for students in health and care, that they speak. They've spoken to Joanne, I know, senior leaders, and this is the opportunity to influence, I think, for them to tell their story and why they're doing things differently and how they're doing things differently, because it's the role modeling, I think, that we need to see for our future leaders. Any other questions coming before I launch into mine?
I was going to ask if we could hear Jay's poem.
Yeah, we do need to hear. We have a poet on our who's well known within our system here in Greater Manchester, Jay Ahmed. I asked Jay to come as a poet, and he can introduce himself and his interests, and yeah, let's hear some poetry.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Thank you for having me, and thank you, everyone. Brilliant presentations. I love what I'm hearing here today. Obviously, I'm not a professional. I'm not professional. I'm an expert by experience, in fact. So, yeah, it's lovely to be invited here and to join you and share some of my poetry and listen to you talk about the things which I've been pushing for so many years. So, first thing I want to say is that I really believe in poetry. I believe that writing is therapy, and I believe that sharing is healing. This is a term that I've coined. Writing is therapy and sharing is healing, and both these things really have to happen. So I'm glad to hear so much people talking about expression, how important that is to people. I believe in promoting creative expression as well, and expression is not always nurtured as it might be. This quite often leads to people feeling closed off, and people can start to feel unwell. As such, I feel poetry can be used as a preemptive measure to maintain the well-being of the mentally well before a lack of ability to express can result in mental illness. And I have not firm evidence of this, but I have many people who I support who tell me the only reason they're able to carry on working, etc., is because of the support they receive through creativity with me. So the first thing I want to talk about is Poetry Peers, which is something I started at the beginning of this year. We have a lot of members, a lot of people benefit. It's a good mix of people, service users and professionals, and this really helps because I think that this model helps promote and destigmatizes mental health, and it promotes sort of the de-ghettoizing of services in the sense that you find a lot of these services, you turn up and everyone's a service user, so you don't meet any other types of people in there. I never believed in that, and even now I'm promoting with the CLS model in Salford. I'm trying to promote something a little broader, something where we all get together and we help each other maintain our own well-being, because we're all at different stages. Even those who are well, we still struggle, so it's really important that happens over time, and I'd like to think that I can promote that in Salford and Greater Manchester, hopefully, with the work that I do in Greater Manchester as well. Yeah, so I'm also doing something with SRFT, actually, which is at the moment I'm organising.
Salford Royal.
Salford Royal. Sorry, my apologies. Salford Royals Foundation Trust. They approached me because I have some understanding of social work, and I believe there's some social workers on this line today. But they have some understanding of they have some social workers working in their teams, and they wanted to help develop their professional standards. So I'm quite honoured that they approached me. I'm putting together a package at the moment, which hopefully I'll be delivering in later this year. It's there to help professionals. So it's not just the well-being of the general populace or people with mental health problems, but also those supporting the services, which I'm keen to make sure are taken care of through poetry and creativity. So, and one final thing, just recently, in fact, just yesterday, I was offered an opportunity to start working with youths doing poetry. Now, this is something I've not done before. The youngest age group I've ever worked with is 16 to 25-year-olds, a group of disabled people. That was tough because I needed a lot of support around me in the room. There was varying levels of disability, and it's something I've not come across before, but I worked on it and I worked hard to get that right. So this is a new challenge for me, but something that's more important, because I do believe strongly that what our failings in mental health is actually not addressing the problem early enough. And what we need to start doing is building the resilience and the understanding of mental health in the youth, so they're not actually as distracted or even as scared when things go wrong. And yeah, I think I'll just share my poem now. It says it all, really. I really wanted to come here. I wanted to write something specifically for this event, because Heather's a very good friend of mine, and I feel as though I should have come here with something, but unfortunately I had a really late night last night. I wasn't really, yeah, I was a really late night last night, so I wasn't able to write a new poem. But
you write prolifically, don't you? So
I do. I do. It doesn't take me that long to write one, so it's no excuse that I've not brought a new one. Right. I'm going to read you one of my favourite poems at the moment, which I wrote on the 7th of the 7th. It's called The Rose That Grew from the Concrete. Now, those of you who are aware of Tupac Shakur might know that he wrote a poem in the 90s. He's not known for his poetry, he's known more for his rap, but he also wrote some poetry. He wrote a poem called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And one of my friends really likes this poem, and I wrote this poem for them, really. But at the same time as it being sort of a poem for them, describing their journey as it stands now, it's also a poem reflectively, autobiographically about me, because I feel that this person is very much on a similar path to me, just at different points in their journey, that's all. So this poem is called The Rose That Grew from the Concrete, and I really do hope you enjoy this. See my crooked stem, my damaged petals closed and folded. As I grow through cracks of my life's pain, the trials which left untold trouble me within. Beneath this skin, I am this soul that yearns to feel some warmth again. I yearn to feel more whole. And now my lifelong journey is starting to unfold. As a path of my own making, each step I take, I hold. Every hurt and hardship firmly in its place, healing every day as every day I come to face. Challenges at work, at home, and within my mind. This path which I have chosen is one not yet defined. It is a path of reckoning on which I will not break. This path I choose to walk upon, the path I chose to take. Now seeking out my destiny, I shun my former fate. There is no mistake in this, I have to elevate and take that which imprisoned me for oh so many years as learning for a future life that has yet to occur. These are my damaged petals. This is my crooked stem. If you ask me any question, ask me how, not why, for then you'll see me for my nature. You'll see me in the light of this, my sunny season, on my way to futures bright.
Woo! Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. That's great. And I think we've got a final exercise, Matt. We're going to have a little drama. Have you got time for a bit of drama? We're on time.
Yeah, I mean, well, we could just do one thing very quickly. I mean, one of the things we talk about is non-verbal communication. If everybody could turn their cameras on just for a second, I'm not going to ask you to say
you're all
anything.
dressed.
Yeah, well, the top part. Let's just see your faces if you're on display there. We're not going to ask you to do anything that involves exposing yourself or feeling uncomfortable or saying anything even. This is just to sort of demonstrate level at which we can perceive someone's intention toward us. So I'm just going to ask you to look at one of the faces on the screen. It might help you if you pin that face if you know how to pin it, which is you go to the corner of your own box, go to the little 3 little dots. Oh, sorry, go to the corner of the person whose face you're looking at and pin one of the faces. It's up to you. You don't have to. You could just look at one of the faces on the gallery. But I want you to look at somebody on the screen, one individual, and I'm going to ask you to play an action. And the action is going to be something I'm going to tell you to do, but I'm going to ask you to do it just by thinking the thought. So you're not acting, right? You're not pretending, right? I'm just going to say, look at that person and think the thought, I, something you, right? And because of the work that we're doing and because all human beings deserve it, I want us to play the action to respect. So I want you to look at one of the faces on the screen. You don't have to pull a face. You don't have to be self-conscious. Just look at that face, look at that person, and think the thought over and over again, like a mantra, I respect you. And then take a wee glance around some of the other faces on the screen and watch somebody respecting someone. And to just tell you, to give you an indication of how clearly these things are perceived, even at a subconscious level, now I'm going to ask you to change that action, and I want you to think the thought, I reject you. So maybe look at the same person, maybe look at a different person, but just think the thought, don't pull a face, just think the thought, I reject you. Then take a moment to look around the screen at the faces and see how clear it is that their eyes are rejecting someone. And so as not to leave us on a negative beat, I want you to look at someone's face. Now, the good thing about this on Zoom is you can't tell who's looking at who, so so don't feel too self-conscious about it. I want you to look at one of the faces, and if it's not too much to ask, I want you to think the thought, I love you. Not necessarily romantically, but in the sense that everybody deserves and needs love. So look at one of the faces and just think the thought, I love you, or I am trying to love you. And look around at the other faces on the screen. And look how beautiful everyone is. If I asked you to be beautiful, you'd get all self-conscious and go, like you're taking a selfie. But if I ask you to love someone else, you become lovable. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you so much. What a great time we've had. An hour and a half and it's just gone. If you, I want to thank Phil and Dave, Matt and Pat and Jay for joining us. I think we'll have a bit more of poetry on some future events. I think it's really good. The recording will be available. The presentations will be available. The contact details. Jay, if you want to send me a poem, we'll send that on. Yes, people are saying it's very powerful and very apposite right now. I like the word apposite. And super duper. We've got some further events. I'll just mention them briefly. We've got Neil Baldwin, who is the star of the film Marvellous, a man who has a disability but refuses to accept it and became the kit man for Stoke FC. He's with Malcolm Clark, my friend and former chief executive when I first went into management, and they'll be live from Keele University on the 21st of October at 11, and there's a watch party for the film Marvellous on the 20th of October at 8 p.m. So you can watch the film the night before and then meet Neil and Malcolm. Neil may say anything at all. I may have no control over that meeting whatsoever. So that should be good to watch. Malcolm, if you're interested, is the chairman of the National Football Supporters Association. So they're big into football. And on the 16th of November, at 11 o'clock is Robin Farrow, who is the anthropologist behind the Wigan deal and currently working also in another part of Greater Manchester around transforming communities by putting communities into partnership with their statutory services. So quite a famous anthropologist there. But I better say thank you very much to everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'm slightly over. I'll never make it as a TV presenter, will I? And I hope to see you all again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.